right. Well then, welcome everyone to episode 3 of Above Spirituality and Above Language podcast. My name is Gino. I'm your host for this segment of the cast. And today I'm really happy to have our first guest. So let me introduce my friend, William, TJ Williams Hager. He is a minister in care candidate for ordination. And as I understand it, he was the first openly gay Baptist minister in Metro New York. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we've searched high and low and have not found any other openly LGBT folks here in not here, but in Metro New York who are in the ordination process. Judson Memorial Church in the Village took me in care about a year ago. So in care means that you are underneath the congregational movement, congregational society, and ministry. And they take you underneath their wing and walk with you through the ordination process. They do things like aid you into paper writing, walk with you as you seek a call, because within the American Baptist process, you have to seek a call and be ordained into something. So ABC Churches is the denomination of Dr. Martin Luther King, denomination of Raphael Warnock, denomination of Jeremiah Wright, so Chicago's own prophetic leader, denomination of Reverend Jesse Jackson, a strong history in the civil rights movement. They broke apart from the South over slavery and then moved to the East Coast. So where all things prophetic goes down.
Now, one of the things I always love talking to you about is that you really opened my eyes to that whole world. And funny enough, the world of Christian bureaucracy. Because I was raised Catholic, and for us, it's just you become a priest, then they give you a parish, and then you live there until they say, hey, you're going across the country, and then you're living there now. Or, as is often the case, they take gentlemen usually from, a lot of times I've had a lot of priests growing up, from Africa or from South America, and they'll bring them up here to Chicago. And then suddenly you are the pastor at, St. Philip's the Apostle out in Addison. And so, you've been educated in... Tell us a little bit about your education, because I've always wondered, what does it take to finally get, the title,
It is a long process among progressive Christianity, because as my spiritual father, Jeremiah Wright, will say that you cannot, just walk into ministry and snap on a collar. And then a whole bunch of Negroes follow you. So quote unquote, y'all. So a whole bunch of that's quite a quote. That a whole bunch of Negroes follow you. That just like when you choose a doctor, the doctor has to have an education. So when you choose a pastor, that pastor should have an education. So the unqualified yes, as also another spiritual mother, Tracy Blackman, says, that when you say yes, that you say yes to God, but that you also say yes to serving society, to serving community, to doing the work of justice, that you say yes as a beginning of the process. That means saying yes to seminary. And so I said yes to New York Theological Seminary. Graduated with my Master's of Divinity in 2017. Before I graduated, I took a clinical pastoral care process at Beth Israel Hospital, which is now Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan, where I walked the floor and went into people's hospital rooms and said, hi, I'm Pastor TJ, and I'm here to listen, to help. I'm here to walk with you a little bit in your process, and I'm here to help you tell your story. So that means walking with folks in an interfaith way. Not everyone was Christian. There were folks who were Muslim. There were folks who were Jewish. There were folks who were atheists. So leaning on the arm of love for atheist brothers and sisters, and saying, how do I help you tell your story? What is it that you want to say to your family in this process? Some said, I want to tell my family that I'm ready to go home. Others would say, I want to tell my family that I'm ready to have the medical care that I need to have. Or I want to tell my family that I love them. Others said, I'm ready. I'm seeing my mother. There was an Episcopal priest who said, I'm seeing my mother in a field, and she's ushering me to come over. And so I want to tell my daughters that I'm ready to go. So the mysticism of spirituality. So then from clinical pastoral care to field service at Judson Memorial Church, where I first encountered them and their wonderful queer saints ministry, a ministry that has been an advocate for sex workers in the village, a ministry that has been an advocate for people living with HIV/AIDS, a ministry that has been an advocate for LGBT folks, and a ministry that has been on the forefront of women's rights there in the village, the mysticism and the social. So preparing how to merge the two. So, and of course, there's the paper writing. I took a mysticism course that we'll talk about later.
Honestly, that's just fascinating. You know, that sort of chaplaincy work, if I'm saying that correctly, is just, it's, the first episode I think we were talking a lot about how spirituality and the practices of it, and, whatever form it comes, is so important because it is tied directly to the meaning of human life. And that's probably the biggest reason anyone practices spirituality other than their culture. But I mean, of course, all of human life is derived from meaning. If there's time, some other time, I might tell you about the time when I got to do something kind of similar. My cousin, who passed away 2 years ago, I think yesterday, he had a very rare trisomy, and it was degenerative. And God, I'm sure you had some experience with this. Like, not all hospice is nice. Sometimes it's long and it's just miserable, and his was. And I got the chance to. He was afraid of death, and just to tell him like what I had learned through my education at the School of Metaphysics and other sources. So, more important than that very meaningful experience to myself was just that there's something so special, something so like incredibly human about being there at the end. But just to divert a little bit, just want to introduce for our guests and our listeners what the topic today will be. Now, when I met TJ, it was at the Parliament of World Religions last year at McCormick Place here in Chicago. Amazing time. And I remember it was it was on the Tuesday, so it was the second day. I was running a booth for the School of Metaphysics, and I finally had some free time, and I was like, I'm gonna go out and I'm just gonna see what I can see. And I was super in this weird place. I was feeling very nervous and unsure of myself. And I remember that was when I saw my friend over here. I think your dreads were up that day, your braids or whatever. I apologize if I mispronounced them. Hair was up that day, and you just gave me a smile. I think you complimented something I was wearing, and we just had this like 3-hour-long conversation, and have been friends ever since. So the topic of our conversation that day, which I'd love to continue, was it was mysticism and justice work. And I love that you were already bringing that up. So why don't you give me your preliminary thoughts on that, and then we'll just kind of let the conversation flow.
Ministry and justice work. What does it mean to say yes in our own spiritual walks, and how that spiritual walk become alive in intangible and lived out experiences for us as human beings? What does it mean? What does the mysticism of our faith, so be that Judeo-Christianity, be that Judaism, be that Islam, be that Buddhist, how does our faith become alive in society? How does our faith become lived out experiences where our yes is not just a spiritual journey, but a physical manifestation of the God that we say that we serve and love and know in our being. That our unqualified yes of I love our God and our spirituality means that we also say yes to humanity. Spirituality, how the spirituality meets the physicalness. I like to create words every once in a while. Totally hard. The physicalness of God, of who we are as human beings. Like even in this place that we find ourselves in globally, as we tackle with environmental injustice, as we tackle with climate change. What does it mean to say that we love the planet, or say that we love the God of the planet, but yet we disrespect the creation within it? Or what does it mean that every single time that we speak, that every single time that we buy products, that every single time that we choose grass-fed products, that every single, or meats, that every single time that we choose vegetables and fruits that are not just being where trees are being torn down, where products are being torn down, but regrown, so that the planet can continue going. So what does it mean? So it means that we understand that there is a connection between our spiritual selves and our physical planet, and how we be humanity on the planet and in life.
So on that topic of like, what does it mean? Now I have a very personal definition of like what I would say the word mysticism means, because I'm a word guy, and my arrogance is that it's like, no, this is what it means, and that's kind of a me problem. It would probably be better to be open to what other people say it means. So that's my next question. Is when you heard the word mysticism, what does that word, like, how would you define that word? Because I'll share my definition maybe after that, but I would love to hear what that word means to you.
That there are answers, that there are questions that we don't have answers to. That there is a mysticism to our journeys, to life, questions of life and death, questions of creation, that we just don't have. But yet the question remains, and the question continues on long after we discontinue. The mysticism. It means beauty. It means wildness, amazement of life, of the end of life. For me, at least.
That's so interesting because, like, as I hear that, that makes me think of like the word mystery, which I feel silly in that I never saw that. Obviously, they share the same root. So it's kind of like that mystery of what is present in the spirit. And then also to what I was getting from you was kind of like the mystery of like our own lives. To me, the word mysticism means like the direct experience of like the spirit, the direct experience, you could say, of God, of truth, of light. And there's a lot of different words. So, do you find like, what do you think about like the juxtapositions of our definitions?
I think that the positions of our definition. I think that mysticism is more than our definitions. I think that it's more than what we can even imagine, because that's to me, when I think of mysticism, is that that it's bigger than ourselves, that it's a surprise in the breath of life. That it's a surprise in how the seasons are, or even let's go back to seasoning of how of how the seasoning changes the texture of food. Like when chicken sets in lemon juice or sets in lime juice, that if it sets a little bit longer, that it changes the texture. And while there's a working definition of why that changes, there's still a mysticism of why that changes, of why that becomes different.
And I would say that I do want, especially now, I'm pretty hungry, so like the direct experience of some lemon chicken would be pretty nice. But what was I gonna say? I like what you said, because here's my problem, is because I can be somewhat brainy and arrogant in the overemphasizing definitions, and spitting out facts that I've heard and that make sense to me, or supposedly ideas would be better than facts. That is one of the things they say about the mystic experience, is that it is something that is beyond definition, that human, what was it, Paul? He said St. Paul said, the peace of God beyond words, that's the mystic. So I like that, and that's why I like hearing other people's things.
I remember when we first.
Say that again, just you were saying there was.
Oh, there was a conversation that you and I were having when we first met about my understanding of mysticism, and I gave a sort of kind of note of a memory that I had of the call. I've thought about this often. I've never really written about it, but maybe one day I'll write about it. Of the call to serve. That I remember having a dream or a memory, perhaps, of sitting in a room full of books, and there was what seemed to be an old man who seemed to be the keeper of the books. And he said to me, "It's time for you to go down." And so, and what I gather is, if that is a memory, that it was a memory of my being before I was placed in this body. He said, "There's time." He said, "It's time for you to go down. We will see you soon. To us, what is soon? But there's work for you to do there." And I thought, wow, the mysticism of there. What is the meaning of the mysticism of there? And what is the meaning of that room of all? What I gather is a knowledge. I remember many years later, there was a Unitarian sister who talked about a spiritual room of knowledge. She had a name for it, and I don't remember. I can't recall how she named it or what she named it.
Was it Akashic or Akashic record?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And perhaps you could tell me more about the Akashic record. Because I've never understood that. But she said, "Oh my gosh, you have that." And to me, that's always been a mystery, that I was in a room and I was being sent to a place that was no longer a part of that room, and told that they would see me later, but that there were things for me to do. The mysticism of that.
So one of the things that I always connect to that which is mystical is, I don't know if this is the jargon, but the word I always like is sort of the phrase beyond the veil, and maybe you could comment on what a Christian take would be on this. But it seems to me that in spiritual work, spiritual practice, spiritual experience, there's this sort of dichotomy of there is that which is of the physical world, of the physicalness, your humanness, your ego, your identity, your animal nature, And thus the mystic experience is there's this other thing. There's this whole spiritual world. And I love saying like beyond the veil, because what, the saints and the seers and the sages always say is like, oh, that's like the real thing. That's like actually what's happening. Your only problem is you don't see it at all. It's literally never not what's actually going on, but you don't see it. And, your dream reminds me of like, or makes me think that's like stuff or happenings that are like beyond the veil. And I love it because you get these peaks of it. I think a lot of people become spiritual because they have some sort of experience in a small way or a big way that shows them beyond the veil. And that's what gets them started. What was it? Wasn't it Wayne Dyer who was talking about that like quantum moment? I don't know if he coined that term, but it's that moment where things change. The Akashic Record, as I understand it, is one of those things beyond the veil. But again, the thing to know about that term beyond the veil is we go back to our Christian heritage, and Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within. So the Akashic Record is supposedly, in more modern spirituality, I was actually just giving a talk on this at the Infinity Foundation a couple days ago. The Akashic Record is this perfect record of everything that's ever been created. Everything in an infinite past, down to the tiniest thought even. You could say that the mind of God, nothing is ever forgotten. One of my go-to spiritual teachers, David Hawkins, he said that in his experience, it's even more than that. It's that everything that's ever been created it cannot be destroyed. So it exists forever. And there was a gentleman, an American mystic from the late 1800s, early 1900s named Edgar Cayce, who developed the ability to go into the Akashic Record and read from it. And that was one of the persons who kind of familiarized it. And it is often described as like, at my school metaphysics, we do Akashic Record readings. And the practitioners will describe, you either see like a big library, or you might see like a filing cabinet, and you open it up and you go exactly where you want. Or some people, it's just a computer. And that it's obviously a non-physical it's a non-physical thing, so your brain sort of interprets it.
I also remember seeing kind of like clouds, like the clouds around the library. This what seemed to be an elder who knows, or in his being, who knows things and who is present within the universe. And so what I've now learned is like the energy of the universe, the becoming unified with the universe. And so in which every day we as humanity are on this side, as the old folks will say, on this side of the living, or on this side of the grave, that we are in a process of becoming unified with the universe itself.
The imagery that you describe reminds me so much of one of my favorite spiritual books I've ever read called, I'm even hoping to do a whole episode on it with either convince Nils or Alexander to read it, and we can discuss it, is this book called Journey of Souls. And without going too deep into it, Dr. Michael Newton, who was he was a hypnotherapist, and he supposedly was able to get people through regression therapy to remember what we would call like the afterlife, which is an interesting term because through what he discovered was that you spend way more time there. He's like, that's your real life. Like Jesus said, you are not of this place. You are God's. Saying to wear the physical world like a loose coat. And those imagery and even that elder is very much the imagery that his patients, his subjects would relate. And there was that big thing with the elder, because a big thing they talk about is on the other side, there's a very much a culture, you could say, of like a student-teacher relationship. You might have heard the word like master soul or spirit guide. In Christianity, you more just call it like your guardian angel. And what they say is like that's a real thing. And that those elders are usually just people too. Switching gears a bit to tie in the justice piece. One thing that we were talking about, and one thing you sort of hear in more like mystically leaning spiritual traditions, or especially modern conversations, is that, they talk about ideas or concepts that like the physical world is perfect, even with all of its many, many problems, even with your personal sufferings. And you're supposed to say that this is a place of learning, of growth, of perfect karma. And that as one gets closer to God, you find more and more that like nothing needs to change. And these are ideas you more so see in either in Eastern spiritualities or modern more Western commentaries on those. Yet that's like either a difficult pill to swallow or like a weird thing to put next to like the aim of most conventional religions, which a lot of that is to help people or to better the world. So what does that inspire you to think?
The idea, it is, the idea of doing nothing, which is basically how I sort of think of that, and how I kind of process that is what, can it be justified? Can that be used as a justification to set within or to set with, but yet to not to get up and to act and to push. My best friend Cherie Alexander, who passed away about 2 years ago, she hated Christianity. Just hate. She used to say Christianity. She's like, when I think of Jesus, I want to write down "Poor Jesus," or get a T-shirt the way that say "Poor Jesus." Y'all do it again. That she would often say, what would Jesus want you to do? That as far why beyond Christianity, beyond your Christian faith. She called me Thomas because my full name, my birth name. Beyond your Christian faith and beyond Christianity's individualistic efforts of just looking within, what would Jesus want you to do, and how would Jesus want you to respond to injustice? How does Jesus want you to grow? She talked about Buddha. I know that Dr. King relied a lot on his Buddhist reflections and his work within the Buddhist with the ideology of Buddhism and the mysticism of Buddhism as he meditated on the Christ and the God of his understanding through a Buddhist process. That was how he acted upon justice, how he moved the Black church into becoming a physical manifestation of justice in the world. To move us so that all of us in this room can sit side by side at lunch counters and at diners in the South and even on the East Coast, so that Black folk can buy property. Because from throughout the years, it wasn't until after 1949 that many Black folks could not buy property. Of America becoming that place where all of God's children can have shoes. Vogelin, I was reading, Eric Vogelin, Mysticism and Social Justice, related his life's work to this understanding. He wrote 5-volume series, Order in History. He wrote another piece called Justice, the trace of justice of mysticism, or the trace of a just order. He insisted on a series that is the task of every society in history, to create its order to a manner that will endow the fact of its existence with the meaning of turns of the ends of the divine and the human. So how do we have the conversation between how the divine and the human meet together?
So that inspires like two questions in me, but I'll start with the first one. Is what to you then is justice? Which is probably a pretty obvious answer and question, but I would love to hear what is that to you?
It goes back to that unqualified yes. How does my life shape society in ways where all of God's children can have shoes? As we find ourselves in a moment of Palestinian liberation and justice, and European Israel's continued work to genocide and unalive thousands and thousands of Palestinians. As we hear the horrific news of unmarked graves of people being buried alive in Gaza and in the West Bank, of homes being broken into, that within this moment of the call for us, the call for our beloved president, for President Joe Biden, who is at heart a good man, but what is the call for him? How are these young people who are protesting in universities? What is their messages to President Biden in this moment? To step beyond the grooming of European Israel's genocidal acts against the Palestinian people that have been for over 3 decades. We're not just talking about one act. We're talking about years and decades of folks living in an open air prison, of homes being stolen. So the call, the prophetic call for us to speak in this moment, the prophetic call for President Joe Biden is to move beyond what he's learned for 30 or 40 years, and to stand strong, and to stand with the Palestinian people and with the students from Columbia and UCLA and North Carolina University, and the list goes on. And also the call for Turkey, or to stand with Turkey, who has stopped divesting. The call with the United Methodist Church, who said we will no longer divest in European Israel. That it has to be courage to mouth up the courage to stand for justice and to stand for civil rights in this moment.
And so do you find that there's like a need for a vigilance? I love that you keep saying until like all of God's children can have shoes. Because that's such a specific image that like really just, because it's so simple. It's like, yeah, kids should have shoes. People should have clothing. Was it like the cardinal? No, what is it? I forget what they're called, but like those in the Beatitudes, maybe like maybe I'm misquoting it. It's the feed the hungry, clothe the naked. And so again, do you find that there's a big aspect of vigilance? And if you do, how do you relate that to your Christian background?
Jesus said, one of the most important verses, Jesus said, whatever you've done to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you've done to me. That whomever needed bread to eat, that whomever was poor, that whomever was in prison and you didn't visit them, that whomever needed medical care, my version, and didn't and couldn't pay the copay, that you step up and you pay the copay. Jesus said, whoever needed marriage equality, but yet you didn't give marriage, you didn't pass a public policy for marriage equality. Whatever sister and daughter and mother whose voice was quieted and whom was told that she didn't have autonomy over her own body, that those actions separate her from me, separate Mary from me, who was at my tomb and whom told the hiding men that I would be alive, that I was alive. So she went and she spread the gospel on that resurrection day. That what it means in my Christian understanding is that justice and Jesus has to be connected together. Again, justice for trans rights, that we cannot be biblical and be Christians who say that they love Jesus, but yet who take away the right for trans folks to have autonomy of their bodies, to be able to express their true selves. Jesus saw that with eunuchs when he talked about the eunuchs in Matthew, where he said eunuchs, trans folks, were important folks to my society, important folks to public policy. When he talked about the woman at the well who needed health care for her daughter and who wouldn't stop until Jesus acknowledged her being there, her presence there. When he talked about his brother who was buried and Mary and Martha was at the grave and said, Lord, you took too long and he's now dead. But he needed health care and no one would give him health care. And Jesus said, okay, if humanity cannot give him health care, then I will step into my divinity and divinity will give him health care. So he said, Lazarus, I'm giving you health care. Lazarus, step forward. And Lazarus stepped forward and tore out the breathing machine and said, okay, I have health care now. That whatever was bothering my kidneys is healed. Whatever was bothering my heart was healed. So the state of justice and injustice in the world is a Jesus thing. And as ministers of the gospel who say that we are Christian, who say that we love Jesus, but yet we don't step forward within the mysticism of Jesus calling us to be justice stewards and justice speakers, that we miss the mark. And perhaps I would even wage that we don't really know the Jesus that we say that we know.
So just as a question, Nils, how are we doing on time right now?
We are at 39 minutes.
Okay, cool. So, wow, I love your interpretations because I'm a big believer that when it comes to scripture, I think it's important for people to read it. They don't know it, but it's one of the main philosophies of the world. Even if you've never read it, a long time ago they decided it and it just evolved from there. But I think it's so important that not only to just read it or to hear what someone else told you about it and then believe a certain thing because I'm Catholic or I'm Hindu or I'm Sunni or whatever have you. That's important to make your own conclusions on it as well. And I can respect that that's not how everyone wants to relate to scripture. A lot of people, one day we'll bring on my roommate who is not like totally, I shouldn't make any assumptions for him, but he is more of a person who's like, I respect that this is what it says and this is the way it is. And that makes sense to me. And it was interesting because the other day I was talking to him, and we cracked open the Bible, and I read Galatians, and he was teaching me about Galatians. And Paul is such an interesting figure to me because, St. Paul to me is a great Christian mystic. He had the experience of like Jesus revealed his mystery to him so powerfully it struck the poor man blind for several days, and it was like probably one of the best things that ever happened to him. But simultaneously, Paul is a this is the way it is kind of guy. And I was very interested to see how, while he was that, he was also a reformer. He was like, a lot of the old law, that's not important anymore. But then the other side of it, a lot of what he would call like the law of Moses, whatever you want to call it, the old law, you better believe that's important. That's important forever. And some of those things, as I've seen it, would be at odds, or seemingly at odds with, you could just say, I don't want to say the LGBTQ movement or lifestyle. I'm struggling for the best word, but with those kind of people. And how do you, especially as an openly gay, minister, how do you rectify that? Because there seems to be places, I can't quote them, where Paul doesn't really mince words on, yeah.
I think being honest about who Paul is, that Paul had issues. That Paul, on the road, that when he met a living Jesus, that Paul was still a person of the culture that he was born into, where that culture. So in fact, Scripture is still a representative of the culture of those times, of the religious traditions of folk who grew up within Judaism, but a conservative Orthodox Judaism of their time, of what does it mean when women are not giving birth to more than one child, when the seed is falling to the ground. I know that Paul talked about that. So in terms of men, that what does it mean when that happens? That for Paul and for the culture of that time, it means that it's gone to waste, right? That it is not giving birth to replenish the earth, which was a concern because their view of the planet was very limited to what was around them. They didn't realize that there was this wide world of Native Americans that go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. That there was this wide world of Asian society that goes back millions and millions and millions of years. That Buddha and that the mysticism of our collective face and of the face of humanity goes back millions and millions of years longer than Christianity does. Paul was limited, and also longer than Judaism. Paul was limited to what his culture was during that time. So understand where Paul laid victim to his limits. Just like us, we would be limited if we didn't travel. We would be limited in our thoughts. I remember having a conversation with an old friend she was the partner of my best friend Cherie. And I said to her, I was an exchange student in Finland when I was in high school. And she was like, "You were an exchange student to Finland, Thomas? Really?" She was like, "Cherie never told me that," because Cherie used to be my babysitter, actually. And so, I knew Cherie. Cherie was the only one who called when Mom had work to do. So Cherie never shared that with her. And so being an exchange student to Finland for a year and living amongst Finns in Nilsia, Finland, and Leppävaara, Finland, and Vaatekas, that my mind grew as a high school student longer and further than the hood of the Mahoney Valley, which was my mother's intentional plan. That woman always had, she and Daddy always had an intentional plan for their last born, right? So that plan was, we want to make sure that you know that the world is bigger than what? Is bigger than your limits. So that, unlike Paul, I am not limited to a cultural and social limitation of the Mahoney Valley and of Youngstown, Ohio.
To me, it just seems like when you relate to the dogma of a faith, or if you're just being honest, like the dogmas of even modern spirituality, because, we're not special. It just seems to me, it's always been so obvious, or at least it just makes a lot of sense to me, that we evolve as a people, and that the rules that govern us also evolve, and they evolve along the track of love. I know that can maybe be scary to some people, because they think, well, if this is a rule, it needs to always be a rule. Because otherwise, what did it matter? Like, what was the authority of that rule in the beginning? And well, as a people, we evolve. Our consciousness rises. And because, at the time of Jesus, tax collectors, they charged extra taxes because they got to keep them. That's for anyone who's not Christian. That's why, if you hear Christianity, that's why they always talk a lot of smack on the tax collectors. Or, if you were a leper, your family often abandoned you. If you cheated on your husband, it was the law that they would stone you. Bring her out to the center of the village. Hand little Timmy a rock. He's throwing the rock. And these are obviously barbaric things that we would not do in at least a modern society. Yet there are still people on the planet who are of that consciousness. Horrific things. You hear the stories of, I don't want to cast shame, but other countries, I know they happen here as well, but like in other countries, it's in certain countries that I won't go into, but it's like a normalized part of the culture and their consciousness. Yet even Paul himself showed that things could evolve, because he spoke about like the law of the Jews did not necessarily apply to the law of the Gentiles, because Jesus had shown that was no longer important. And so it's interesting to me to see where we can't keep staying on board with that. Now, that being said, though, I think you can have that idea and at the same time say there is also an absolute. There is a certain thing that does not change. And I think that's some more fundamentalists would say, well, that's what Paul was talking about. And he's talking about the laws that govern your life, in addition to the laws that, God governs the universe, you could say. And just my own bias personally and my arrogance is that it's the laws that govern humanity, with some exception, those are the ones that are mutable. But that I would agree that there is that absolute, which is the spirit beyond the veil. Which is often described, especially in Eastern traditions, as unchanging, unceasing, unending. And that this is the thing that actually does govern both the human and inhuman worlds. And it is from that experience and that understanding that some people will arrive at the conclusion that therefore the world does not need to change. The world is perfect. When you see beyond the veil, you will see that everything is as it is supposed to be. That the perfection of karma is that everything that's being caused is because of everything that happened before it, and that it makes perfect sense, that it is the way it is, could not be any different. You could almost say should not be any different. And, in some Buddhist perspectives, there are the Buddhas, I forget the term. There's a term for a spiritual seeker who realizes a high truth equivalent to like Siddhartha, and they do not speak. They maybe sort of benefit the world by just their high holy presence, but they don't go out and they don't teach what they learned. And for anyone who's unfamiliar, that was almost actually Siddhartha's experience. After his 40 days, where he finally realized, as I recalled it, he was just like in this high space where he realized, wow, this is not going to be easy for the world to understand. Most people aren't going to get it. And it occurred to him, maybe I don't say anything at all. And the famous story goes that he looked to a lotus on a pond, and he had this realization that people were like the lotuses, that those who realized the perfection of all things and the way of the world, the Dharma, were like the lotuses that had flowered on the surface. But he said, but there are those who are like the lotuses that are right below the water's surface, and they're about to flower. The little instruction, they too would realize. And then, of course, that there are people who are like the lotuses that are like still very deep in the water, just below the mud, who will be eaten by the turtles. They will not understand. I just wanted to share that story, but more so, what are your thoughts on, maybe more so, you could say more so a Christian idea that that God's world is perfect, that God's will is absolute, that the world is as God intends it to be. And yet, where does that stand next to what is very clearly, the teachings of Christ to better the world and to love thy neighbor and help thy neighbor in some of the ways that you had shared?
My mother used to say that what changes, that the world changes, but that God's love stays the same. That the identity and the understanding of the God of our understanding is remains stable, but that the expectation of humanity is that we evolve and evolve together. Like one of the reasons why we're seeing such an upheaval, political and social upheaval in America, is because in the belief from some that we must go back to the way things used to be in order to gather, in order to be a God-creative society, a God-creative American society, but yet leave out love. The consistency of how humanity is warmed by the breath of God each morning in the air that we breathe, in the sun that hits our brow even in the winters, in the light of birth, in the darkness of the night, of how even in the darkness there is a warmth and safety because God is present, because God's love is present. But yet, the efforts to roll us back in this democracy is cold and is unforgiving to folks who need health care, to folks whose Social Security is threatened, to women, where you have the state of Florida that's now limited a woman's right to choose in her fourth trimester, long before she even knows that she's pregnant. In where you see 54 laws in 50 states limiting trans rights and limiting LGBT folks' rights, or when you see the gutting of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, that love is left out of that work. And so the evolving is limited by those because they refuse to evolve in the light of of a gracious understanding of a God of the universe, or even within the universe itself.
So as I'm hearing it from you, what you're saying is that, like, in this case, the absolute, that which is not going to change, is God's love. And it's the human world that is changing. And so you could almost say that to be instead of being a social justice warrior, to be a mystic justice warrior would be to play your part in that by being the love that God asked. To share my own personal understanding with this, because I was a spiritual seeker who got really into the teaching that everything's perfect. You know, there was again, my friend Hawkins, I shouldn't call him friend, but the teacher who I really enjoyed, and I read his books and I watched a lot of his stuff on YouTube. You know, he said, you know, if you made heaven on earth, he said, where would all the people go? He said, they came here because this is not heaven. And I took that, and, you know, in the school of metaphysics, you meet a lot of really bright, you know, spiritually oriented people who want to see the world grow, and they want to see other people know what they know. You know, we want to share what we have learned. We want to be that lamp on a lampstand, you know, not covered. And I remember I would listen to my students, my classmates, my friends, and I would think, I would almost try to dissuade them, because many of them would be very concerned about the injustice in the world that really, to me, wasn't that big of a concern, because it was playing its karmic perfection. That was what it was supposed to be. That was part of it. And it just didn't have as much meaning to me. And I still remember I was listening to, it was a student, I think. It was either a student or a classmate. And I was going to try to direct them more towards neutrality in understanding the world. Because I do think that if your goal is to rise in consciousness and to like transcend and to like, you know, like enlightenment, there is an acceptance of the world that needs to happen. And then it just hit me. It's like, wait a minute. If that teaching is true, that the world is perfect and that nothing needs to change and that everyone is playing their part, well, then by that very definition, the people who are motivated to try to better the world and to change things are also actually perfect. That it would be their karma to do exactly what they were doing. That it would be that perfection to also try to change the world at the same time. And that blew my mind wide open. And I felt so humbled and stupid, frankly, for ever having tried to convince someone not to do something so awesome as to change the world. And what you really inspired me to then add to those thoughts was that because as much as you want to align yourself with that absolute, that maybe the world is perfect, is to remember that as Christ said, you know, the theme that ties together all of the law and the prophets is love. And thus, as you're trying to rise up in consciousness, yeah, you could take an extremely Zen approach of everything's perfect and I'm just trying to get out of Dodge. That's how Alan Watts puts it. No. I mean, Alan Watts said it very well. He's like, you're trying to skip out on your karmic bill is how he put it. But so too is it obvious and been shown through so many of those people who have realized higher states of consciousness that love and the motivation to help and to enlighten others is part and parcel of that.
That what is it that each and every one of us leave behind when we leave this planet? Is it the absolute idea that the world is perfect? Yes. But is it too? Can it be both? That faith and justice and the absolute idea that perfection is found in humanity, and efforts to change and to better humanity and to encourage humanity to become evolved itself. Is it that? Yes. But I also think that it must be two questions and also two answers. Is it? Or yes, it is. For both. That throughout Christian texts, throughout ancient Christian texts, many times when I speak in Unitarian circles, I don't say Christian texts, but I say ancient texts. Judson Memorial, that is not Unitarian, but that is progressive in thought and how it sees Christianity, says ancient texts, that the ancient fathers, what is it that they expect us to get and to learn as living beings on this planet? That justice and mercy and love and grace is consistent and is living and is what makes perfection. But that also in Jesus' identity, as he lived in his humanity here on the planet, but yet identified in his divinity. When his humanity gave way on the cross, and the divinity stepped in on Resurrection Day, that humanity dies, which makes it imperfect, but gives way to divinity as we pass through humanity, which makes it and us perfect.
Holy hell. Wow, I can see why you're a preacher. Yeah, we're going to wrap up soon. The thing I want to add to this as kind of one of my final thoughts, and something I recommend highly our viewers, our listeners understand, is that when one is trying to grow spiritually, an idea I would introduce is that you might have heard a number of seeming contradictions that we've talked about tonight. And the idea I would have you toy with is maybe contradictions are only a thing that appear in the human mind. But in the higher self, on the other side, what seems to us like a contradiction is it's more like a garden. And anyone who's planted a garden knows you've never planted a weed, but it will grow right next to your tomato plant, and the garden doesn't care. And I think it's the same with the truth. So it's good to get comfortable with that and to seek meaning for your own self in that. And so with that, I just wanted to, as we conclude, I wanted to toss you back the mic and give you a chance if there's any last topic you want to discuss or anything you want to share about what you're doing currently that you'd like our audience to know about.
Eric Vogelin, my mystic hero. I'll leave you with some of his last words. He said, order and contemporary social justice in every society is tied to mysticism. First, mysticism counters the alienation that arises in society due to politically imposed and dogmatism. Secondly, social justice is so closely tied to mysticism and Vogelin's understanding of an ordered society that it could be called its visible face temporarily. Vogelin championed, I am, he said, because I am, large as the source of true order. In contemporary societies that are socially just, he said, following a plan of ideal of a just polis, the open soul is a mystic one, forged in the experience of the felt presence of God. The initiative has been from the divine, seeking a chance to act in human affairs, This divine activity is dependent on a human invitation, welcoming God's agency in concrete situations. So as we meditate on that, and also as we meditate on the conflict between much of mysticism, or some of mysticism, or even a little bit of mysticism, and meditate on the yes for us as humanity, and those in humanity whose heart breaks for injustice every single time we see a child, a Palestinian child, crying for its dead mothers and fathers. Or we hear the voice of a Palestinian mother screaming over a dead child, or an unalived child, as they say in TikTok. Or we see a woman, an American woman, having to go from Alabama to Chicago. An American woman having to go from Florida to Chicago, to Illinois, to New York, just to have health care. Because if she doesn't have health care, she could die and leave her family. That we see LGBT folks who want to form families of their own, but yet are being told that that God does not want them to have families of their own. The mysticism of the unqualified yes, to step in the way and to intervene in injustice, to intervene for justice, and to intervene for humankind, and also for the health of climate. As we end, we are now beginning a rainstorm. A rainstorm where the earth says that it is alive, where the planet says that it has life, where the planet is speaking, where the climate is crying, saying, take care of me, where we are seeing floods in unspeakable places because we have not taken care of the planet. We are leaving behind a planet for all of you, and for those that you birth into life, because you all will birth some folks into life, I hope and pray. And it's unjust that we have done that to Mother Earth herself and to all of you behind. So the mysticism in the moment, the mysticism in our lives, is beckoning us to step forward and to step in the way of injustice, in the way of Mr. DeSantis, in the way of Clarence Thomas, who is bought and paid for by boats and political permission, in the way of Candace Owens, who sold out her community, who's a sister who sold out her community, and is ignoring the fight for voting rights because she's bought and paid for. In the way of our beloved Eric Adams, who we thought was on the side of justice, but yet has arrested young person after young person on the Columbia campus, on the campus of NYU, protesting the unaliving of Palestinians. That he's forgotten that at the heart of the Democratic Party is a socialist movement for justice and for life and for peace. That he's forgotten that when he said, I'm going to run as a Democrat, that meant that he also ran to represent those New Yorkers who dared to step in the way of injustice. So our love for God, our love for one another, our understanding of mysticism is a call for justice and action, but also a call to look within of what the voice of the universe is saying to us individually and collectively together.
Thank you so much for your words, TJ. I'd like to give a special thank you to you, especially for coming out, being our very first guest on the cast. Love to thank Nils for hosting the back end. Love to thank the lovely Miss Kat for being our guest today, just checking it out in the studio. Before we end tonight, just very briefly, I'd love if you want to plug any of your social media or any of the things that you're doing, and then with that, we will sign off.
If you want to connect with, to hear the voices of Palestinians, our beloved brother Ali. Ali is from Canada, and you could do a search in his name in TikTok, where every single day for hours upon hours, that man is talking with Palestinians and with others, hour to hour, minute to minute, in action in the middle of the war zone. So please Google Ali's name. The work of the Riverside Church on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, that was a cathedral to Dr. King and to Desmond Tutu, and also for Buddhist mystics and others. Also remembering the life and the work of James Cones, father of the liberation movement, and brothers and sisters at Union Theological Seminary, who've been committed to justice. New York Theological Seminary, who did a switcheroo on Christian society and started being a beacon and an institution of justice and of Black liberation, and now shares its campus with Union Theological Seminary. Judson Memorial Church in the Village of New York City. Trinity United Church of Christ, an Otis Mosque here in the city of Chicago. Father Michael Flager, Saint Sabina, who's been a voice within the Catholic Church for justice and stepping into war zones here in the city of Chicago. And also stepping into places of power and saying, you have to answer the call to care about Black and brown brothers and sisters on the South Side and the West Side. To Jackie Lewis at Collegiate Church in Manhattan, who's been a voice on MSNBC and a fight for justice. Reverend Al Sharpton, who just now started talking about Palestine. So I love my brother. And he needed to do that. We need to begin the work to unravel our relationship with that genocidal part of humanity that is unaliving thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Well, again, thank you, TJ. You will find links to TJ's socials on the video description and any shorts that we include them in. With that, thank you all so much for your time, and see you next time.